IVM.
Hello and welcome to Simblified. We are today going to do a shortie without Chuck. So we have only Naren and Tony in the studio, and I am dialing in from a couple of thousand miles away. And so we're.
It is infinitely more preferable to have a chuckless short than a shortless chuck. So.
Wait, what empirical experiments?
This is not really well researched up to this point, but
I think that's the caption for the next Instagram post. We already have it. Oh my God! Speaking of chuckles in one way or the other, I think neatly brings us to today's topic, which is Tony.
Yes, to happiness. I think Simblified is the happiest podcast out there. You can, we all laugh at each other and each other's jokes.
Whether intentionally or unintentionally.
Correct. And thankfully, we can't hear the voice of our listeners yet.
Yeah.
So we'll keep it happy till then. But what I really wanted to talk about was the World Happiness Report. I've read about half of the Wikipedia article, so I think we can keep it as a shortie.
You're sufficiently qualified.
So there was this interesting video. We are recording on the 3rd of March of the Zomato Happy Rider. Did you see that video?
No, I haven't. No.
Srikeit, did you?
Zomato Happy Rider?
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
So basically, this is a guy who delivers for Zomato, and I think it's a TikTok video where he was being interviewed by a guy, and he has a smile on his face throughout, right? And why it went viral was because Zomato then changed their account profile picture to this smiling happy rider face, right? But basically, essentially he talks about, and I was watching the video because you have to once it's gone viral, and he's got a permanent smile on his face, and he says, I make 350 rupees a day working 12 hours. He's got a smile on his face throughout. He says all of these things, and if something gets cancelled, then I get the food also. But basically this is it. And in my mind, something didn't compute to say, how does a person earning 350 how does a person earning 350 rupees working 12 hours a day become happy? Because I guess in some senses our mental models don't allow for it, right? To say that happiness is in some senses derived out of how much money you make, etc., given the society you live in, right? And this is one of my pet peeves that have always been there, is that the interviews you see of people or people who speak about how successful they are usually measured in terms of how much money they make.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
And
there's virtually no other metric. Yeah, there is no other metric.
And there's a huge amount of survivorship bias to it, to say you don't interview them. I would say thousands of people who worked equally hard, did the same kind of things, but didn't end up in positions of where they were, right? So I've often wondered, and as I'm getting deep into my 30s, still early 30s, I've often wondered, who is the happiest person? We would never know because that person will never be interviewed, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the interviews are for the vain and the unfulfilled.
And the conventionally successful people, right? But interestingly, about happiness, there is this thing called the hedonic treadmill, which basically says that irrespective of what happens to you in life, your happiness returns to a baseline, more or less, right? Depending on how you were genetically programmed. 50% is what your genetic programming is. The rest is what happens to you. But you always return to a baseline of happiness or satisfaction. So, I mean,
you could literally get your Lamborghini and after some time, just be as happy or unhappy as you were before you got a Lamborghini.
Yeah. So I think psychologists have written a book about this where they've interviewed many lottery winners and people who've had their legs amputated, etc., to arrive at how it settles.
So it works the other way as well.
Yeah.
So you could have a bad, sort of really bad luck, and still recover from the sadness to your earlier level.
Yeah. But essentially, it's impossible to define who is optimally happy, especially in this world of Instagram stories, etc. Right? So, we can obviously do it at a country level, which might be more interesting because something that is measurable is always something that computes within a mental model. So we'll talk about the World Happiness Report. And sometime last year, Greta Thunberg, the
world famous
sensation, spoke about a lot of things. But one of the sentences that stuck with me in her speech was, we are in the beginning of a mass extinction and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you,
my God.
Right? So eternal economic growth is what we've been born into and brought up to believe is the metric.
That is the fundamental of our social contract.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it wasn't always like this because till a point in time, the environment was also important. And when the industrial economic system sort of began, there was always the idea suddenly developed that the natural world is limitless. So earlier you thought that there was a finite amount. Now you're like, you can exploit as much as you want. Technology will catch up and replace what goes away, right? But also, basically right now we are living in times where the environment is very important because we've basically
bucketed it up beyond repair,
screwed it over.
And there is a measurable thing to this, right, which is called the Earth Overshoot Day. Is the date in a year when the nature's budget for the entire year is exhausted. And in 2018 it was exhausted in August 1st. In 2019 it was exhausted on July 29th, which means like for the rest of the year technically you can't use any of
any resources.
But essentially the whole problem is that GDP or gross domestic product has been the measure of a country's economy, and that's constantly what we are optimizing towards and exploiting for, right? So keeping all this in mind, the UN, which is like a very nice fancy organization which keeps, I guess, giving speeches, but like is very ineffective.
And
right?
fat salaries, man. They help impoverished countries in Africa whose GDP is less than like the five
salaries of the top
brass. 5 people's salaries.
Right? Yeah. But they're like your rich uncle who comes into the house and gives you chocolate and your parents aren't very happy about it, right? Like, and then they give a long sermon and then they go away. They impact only one day of your life, but that's what it is. But basically the UN came up with this thing called the Millennium Development Goals, which are supposed to be achieved by 2015, right? Which look at the softer aspects like GDP, of course, is what people are looking at, but there is still extreme poverty and hunger, not enough primary education, child mortality is still rampant, maternal health is important, and environmental sustainability and all of that, right? So essentially there were these parameters that were put in place to be as part of what is called the Sustainable Development Goals. And how does it get further translated into something more meaningful and achievable at a country level, right? And that is where, when we talk about happiness and a country that tracks happiness, what comes to your mind?
Bhutan.
Yes.
They have that national, gross national happiness.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Bhutan is a country which measures gross national happiness instead of GDP. And the way they do that is that the gross national happiness is based on 4 pillars and of happiness. And there are 9 domains within this happiness index of sorts, right? So they have 4 pillars, which are sustainable and equitable socioeconomic development, environmental conservation, preservation and promotion of culture, and good governance. And there are 9 domains within how do you arrive at the gross national happiness is basically there is a long survey of, let's say, 1.5 hours with a statistically representative population, where they are asked questions on 9 domains. And all domains are weighted equally, but there are underlying variables within each domain. So if there are 9 domains, all carry equal weightage, but within each domain there is
so when you talk about domains, you mean like family, like job, like
correct,
work
parameters.
Environment,
correct. So I'll in fact just tell you what those domains are also, right? So they are psychological well-being, health, time use, which is an interesting one, education, which is constant, I guess, cultural diversity and resilience, good governance, community vitality, ecological diversity and resilience, and living standards, right? So there are subjective questions here. And it's basically derived from the sort of Buddhist middle path kind of thing to say that it's so averages don't count. Like one of the things that statisticians say is that when your head is in the oven and your foot is in the freezer, on average, your temperature is normal, but that's not how this is looked at. So basically, if someone is working for hours and hours together and making a lot of money, where someone else is not working that much but is spending a lot of time with their family, etc., they are considered happier, etc. Right? So, and in each of these things, there are sufficiency targets to say only if on all parameters you meet the minimum threshold, do you come to this happiness level of sorts, right? So, in some cases, it is very easy to judge, like education, like till what class have you studied, right? Like 6th standard and above.
There's a number to it.
Yeah, there's a number to it. And there is also a monthly income level, which is the threshold. So famously, Bhutan's currency is the
Dong. No, that's the Vietnamese dong.
The Bhutanese currency is the Gultram, which is also what old monk from Andhra Pradesh is called. So,
oh my god!
Oh man!
Sorry, I did my engineering in Warangal in Andhra Pradesh. So yeah, this I've done
you
this.
You have consumed more Gultram than many will in their lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah, and so essentially, basically, there is thresholds to either it is if you are in the range of 77 to 100%, you are deeply happy. 66 to 76% is extensively happy. 50% to 65% is considered narrowly happy, and 0 to 49% is considered unhappy or not yet happy. Right?
Not yet happy. That's
it's like when what is the terminology used
that's
for
a political measure.
Like instead of, I think it was underdeveloped economies, we started calling them developing economies or something. Developing, right? Present continuous. So but interestingly, we all hear that Bhutan is the happiest country in the world and all of that based on this. But what tends to happen is that anyone above 50% sufficiency in this thing is called happy, right? So by that metric, 90% of Bhutanese are happy is the thing. And the criticism here is that and this does not include any religious behavior or anything like that, right? But some of these things are subjective, like life satisfaction, etc. How a person judges that is up to them, right? And they are not always objective criteria, right? But the main criticism is that before Bhutan became a democracy, they implemented a deadly citizenship law and pretty much got rid of 20% of their population, which belonged to a religious minority. So, in fact, an Australian refugee agency calls the GNH of Bhutan the gross national hypocrisy. Right?
Oh, wow.
So, but in a sense, it's not the absolute number that matters. It's the trend, right? So to say, has this number moved from, let's say, 0.75 to 0.76 or whatever, But how they've managed the headlines is to say that Bhutan is the happiest country in the world, which interestingly is not the case if you consider it at the world level. So Bhutan started this off, and then the UN created something called the World Happiness Report, which has been going on for 7 years now, right? And they based it more or less based on the Bhutan model, where there are these several parameters. There is a survey administered to people to arrive at different measures, right? And according to this ranking, and it is applicable for, I think, around 155 countries, where would you think Bhutan ranks on this in the 155 countries?
In the top 10?
Top 10. Srikeit? You want to
I would say somewhere in the bottom half.
Okay. Bottom half. Okay. Yeah, you're right. They're 90th, 90.
Seriously?
In the ranking. So that's what, like, this is how managing headlines work, right? When we say people outside don't know what's going on in India, we don't know what's going on in Bhutan, right? Like, we all heard that it's the happiest country on earth and stuff like that. But at least I was unaware of this dark history of minorities.
No, it does seem a lot like, I mean, this happiest country thing, along with their happiness index and all that, it seems like a massive like PR exercise more than anything else. Almost like it's a good branding thing that, oh, look at us. I mean, it's almost like our positioning is amazingly different.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but again, like, it's still a more holistic indicator than GDP, so it needs to be given.
The fact that someone thought of measuring that,
absolutely,
even if it is a flawed measure, it is it's
admirable.
Admirable.
Yeah. So the UN also said that in 2011 that the gross domestic product indicator was not designed to and adequately reflect the happiness and well-being of people in a country. And additional measures that capture this need to be put in place, because it is fundamental for humans to, for the pursuit of happiness, basically, right? So in 2012, they sort of tied up with the Bhutanese government and sort of put into place something called the World Happiness Report. I think it used to be the Happiness Index till a point in time, but over the last couple of years, it's just turned into a report. Where the key difference is that in the Bhutanese version of happiness, you basically have thresholds, right? So below 50%, 50 to 66, 66 to whatever, and 77 to 100. In the World Happiness Report, what you have is a ladder. So essentially, you're told, think of a ladder with steps from 0 to 10. And on this ladder, where do you stand in terms of your happiness. Right? And it's again a survey that is carried out, which is...
Where would you stand?
Now this is a very subjective question, right?
I'd say about 6 or 7.
Yeah. I would say around 8, maybe. Srikeit?
I don't know. It varies. I mean, I think it's a... See, that's what, right? This joy versus happiness thing, duality is very weird. We're trying to put a number on where your happiness scale is can vary. Like, it's like different time horizons with different thing, right? It's
correct.
For this week, my happiness rating is around an 8.
Yeah.
But on a larger horizon, I'd say it's a 6 or a 5 or a
valid.
Other way around.
Yeah.
It's very, it's very likely to fluctuate in a reasonable band.
Yeah. But again, the genetics part kicks in, right? For someone, like, their baseline might be 5, they can move up to a 7 or go down to a 3 based on their genetics. For someone, baseline might be an 8 and they can go up to a 10 and maybe go down to a 6. But it's very rare that someone at 8 goes down to a 3, for instance. Like, unless something
this sounds
traumatic
very much like a dating scale. Like, anyone who's a 5 can only date up to a 7 or down to a 3.
Okay.
They have these arbitrary dating scales. No? So, like, someone who's an 8 cannot date a 3.
I think we can all agree that we've fairly punched above our weight on this specific parameter. And that's why we've gone 2 rungs up.
Coming back.
So basically, there are actually some measures which are objective and some which are subjective. Like the World Happiness Report takes into account GDP per capita.
Which is objective.
Healthy life expectancy, which is also objective. And then there are subjective parameters like social support, which in cases is a question like, if you were in trouble, do you have relatives or friends you can count on to help you whenever you need them or not?
Correct.
And what is seen is that developed countries, this is always much higher, and less developed countries is lower. Similarly, freedom to make choices, which is where the government
political freedom.
Another interesting one is something called generosity, which says, have you donated money to a charity in the past month? That's the question that people have to answer.
Very good.
Yeah. So it also is an indicator of, having surplus and also having the bent of mind to help.
Bent of mind also.
Yeah.
And they actually want to donate.
Yeah. And there are also things like perceptions of corruption, etc., which is again a government indicator to say, is your government treating you properly? Are you happy with that? And all of that.
Yeah.
And based on all of these is where the ranking comes in. And no surprise for guessing which is the top country in the World Happiness Report. Which would you think it is?
Norway.
Okay. Srikeit?
Luxembourg.
Wow. Okay. I think it's Finland, and they have been for the past couple of years, and always it's the Scandinavian countries which are 1,
it's
2,
all
and 3.
that salmon that's available.
It's also a function of the population, etc. Right? So that's good. But where do you think India ranks?
In the top 50?
Top 50. Okay, Srikeit?
I'd say top 30 even.
Top 30? Wow, you're also optimistic about our Ache. Then India is at 140 out of 156 countries.
Out!
Unless it's all those secular liberals who are defaming us and taking part in the survey.
No wonder.
Because anyway, the Western media is biased against
Western
us.
Media now
this is my grouse with the Modi government. They're dropping the ball on their agenda. See, if it's coming to 140 out of 156, and clearly they're not getting enough bhakts in front of microphones.
Correct. So in 2018, India was in 133. 2019, 140. 2015, it was on 117. 2016, it was on 118. So we are clearly progressing in the right direction. Yeah.
Some growth is happening somewhere. It may not be in economics, but somewhere it's happening.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't even have to say, but we are way behind countries like China, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. But
Pakistan also.
Yeah. Anyway, but the point is that these things give a more holistic measure than possibly gross domestic product. Of course, none of these measurements are perfect, but just by virtue of there being a ranking, it automatically sort of attunes us to say, okay, these are goals that need to be chased, right? And improved upon. Of course, you can always game the system, optimize.
Well, it's a good new direction to be looking at.
Yeah.
And finally, that's the objective of life, right? The objective of life is to be happier. And if you're not achieving that despite economic success, then there's something you need to rethink about the way you're measuring your success.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, stay
on
safe.
That note.
On that note, stay safe, stay happy, and stay simplified.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that show. We'd like to thank our sponsors this week, HDFC Life and Paytm Money. Also, just a very quick note, I would really appreciate it if you guys could fill out a really short survey on our website. It's on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It's just a brand recognition survey for us to kind of work with the advertisers and give them some data. So it's a very short, less than 1 minute survey. Really appreciate your help in filling it out. And let me tell you a couple of things that you should check out this week. On Paperback, Rachita and Satyajit are joined by the host of Litnama, Lakshmi Krishnan. They talk about women's role in writing and fiction written by women. On The Habit Coach, we have a Women's Day special where Ashlyn talks about periods, PMS, PCOD, and other taboo subjects which shouldn't be taboo at all. On the Empowering series, Zarina is joined by actor Jim Sarb. They talk about the art of storytelling and his unconventional characters. On Agla Station Adulthood, Ayushi and Ritasha talk about coming of rage and coming of age. On IVM Life, Ritika, Alika and Antarish welcome new producer at IVM Sumit to discuss their ultimate fantasy jobs. Don't miss Sumit's first ever recommendation on the show. Thanks and keep listening.
Filter coffee is a fascinating beverage. You need to pick the right beans, blend them in the right proportion, roast them to perfection, and slow brew at the right temperature to get the perfect cup. Which is exactly like great conversations as well. You need to track down the most interesting minds, get them into their zone, and settle down for an unhurried, unscripted chat. And coffee for me is always, always, always best enjoyed with friends. I'm Karthik Nagarajan, and do share my table as I meet some of the most interesting people I know and sit them down for a strong cup of coffee and an even stronger conversation. Join me every Wednesday for a freshly brewed episode. This is not frappe. This is the Filter Coffee Podcast.